Snow fell thick and slow, the kind that hushed the world and made every sound seem farther away than it truly was. Behind the tavern, a fire burned low beneath a soot-streaked pot, and Martha Wynne bent over it, stirring stew with a wooden spoon worn smooth from years of work. The orange glow caught the lines in her face and the silver strands of her hair, though she tried to keep her shawl drawn tight against the wind. The smell of onions and broth drifted into the frozen yard, where boot tracks already filled with white. She had been at it since dawn, cooking for men who did not know her name, who spoke of her only when they wanted more salt or less pride. She had once been pretty, or so she'd been told, back before her husband's fever and the debts that followed him into the grave. Now the mirror in her rented room was cracked, and she looked away from it most mornings. At 50, she lived by her hands, cracked, red and steady, and by the quiet dignity of doing a thing well even when no one saw. In town they called her Old Martha, with the sort of pity that bruises more than kindness. The tavern door opened, spilling laughter and fiddle music into the cold. She kept her eyes on the pot, listening to boots thumping across the porch and a man's voice drawling. "Ain't she still out there in the snow? Thought she'd freeze before Christmas." The others chuckled. One of them tossed her a coin that clinked near her foot. She didn't stoop to pick it up. When the door shut again, the silence wrapped her like a coat. The spoon kept circling through the broth. She tasted it once, nodded to herself, and ladled the stew into tin bowls lined along the bench. The simple act steadied her, like prayer might have once, before faith felt too heavy to lift. Down the alley, a pair of small shapes moved through the falling snow. 2 children, maybe 10 and 8, thin as fence rails and clutching each other. Their eyes shone wide in the dim light of her fire. She turned, pretending not to see them at first. The sheriff had warned her about feeding strays. But when the younger one coughed, she sighed, scooped a ladleful into an empty cup, and beckoned them closer. The boy came first, his little sister trailing like a shadow. They stood shivering, breath misting in the cold. Martha handed them the stew. "Eat quick," she whispered. "And don't let nobody see." The girl murmured something that might have been thank you. The sound was so soft it could have been the snow itself. As they ate, she studied them. The way hunger made their hands tremble, the way their eyes darted toward the tavern door in fear. "You got people somewhere?" she asked. The boy shook his head. "Ma's gone. Pa too." His voice cracked on the last word. Martha swallowed the ache that rose in her throat. She wanted to pull them close, but she only said, "When the fire dies, go toward the church. There's wood stacked behind it. Keep warm there." They nodded. She gave them the rest of her bread. When they ran off into the whiteness, she stood there a moment longer, her fingers numb and her eyes following the little prints vanishing into night. The sheriff found her that way, not long after. Amos Clay was a man who liked order more than mercy. His lantern threw a harsh circle of light around them. "Evenin', Martha," he said. "You been handin' out food again?" She didn't answer. He sighed, rubbing the frost from his mustache. "You can't save every soul passes through this town. You'll starve yourself trying." "They were children," she said. "They were thieves last week. Took apples off Crane's wagon." Her jaw tightened. "Then maybe they were hungry last week too." He studied her, something between pity and annoyance flickering in his eyes. "You got a kind heart, Martha, but kindness don't keep peace. Folks talk. You feed runaways, next thing you know, every vagrant's hangin' around. Ain't good for business." "I ain't runnin' a business," she muttered. He tipped his hat and left, his lantern swinging like a slow heartbeat in the snow. When the silence came back, she felt the old shame settle in. The kind that comes not from doing wrong, but from being told you did. She sat by the fire until her fingers stung, then packed up the pot and started the long walk home. The road wound past the last houses of town, and out toward the dark line of the hills. Her boots sank in deep drifts. The sky had gone silver, the moon smudged behind clouds. Somewhere an owl called, its cry long and hollow. Martha pulled her shawl tighter and kept walking. Halfway up the trail, her foot slipped on ice. The pot clattered from her hand, spilling the last of the stew into the snow. She tried to catch herself, but her knee twisted, and she went down hard. Pain shot up her leg. She sat there, breathing fast, the cold biting through her skirt. "Lord," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he still listened. Snow kept falling, filling the pot, covering her footprints. She thought of the orphans, of her husband's grave out by the cottonwoods, of the faces in the tavern laughing at her age. Maybe this was how the world forgot people. Slowly, quietly, beneath layers of white. Then she heard it. The crunch of footsteps that weren't her own. Heavy, deliberate. She tried to stand, but her leg wouldn't bear weight. Out of the trees, a tall figure emerged. Broad shoulders draped in a fur cloak, long dark hair tied back, eyes reflecting the firelight from his torch. He moved with the stillness of someone who belonged to the night. Martha's heart lurched. An Apache. The town's stories came flooding back. Raids years ago, camps burned, women taken. She scrabbled backward, breath fogging. The man stopped several feet away, lowering the torch so its light gentled across his face. He didn't look cruel. Just tired. "You fell," he said, voice deep and steady. His accent was there, but his words were clear. "Your leg hurt." She hesitated, torn between fear and the human warmth in his tone. "It's fine," she lied. He crouched beside her. Snowflakes melted on his lashes. "No. Not fine." He reached out and she flinched, but he only touched her ankle, turning it carefully. His hand was enormous, calloused, gentle. Not broken. But bad. She wanted to pull away, yet the warmth of his skin through her stockings felt like mercy. "I'll manage," she murmured. He looked up, and for a moment their eyes met, hers gray and weary, his dark and searching. Something unspoken passed between them, something neither had asked for. Then he said, "Storm coming. You'll die out here." "I live in town," she said quickly. "Just down the road." He glanced at the sky. Too far. Before she could protest, he slipped an arm beneath her knees and another around her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, hands gripping his cloak. "Put me down," she said, but the wind swallowed her voice. He started toward the trees, his steps sure and quiet. She could feel his heartbeat where her cheek brushed his chest. Snowflakes caught in his hair, silver against black. The scent of smoke and pine clung to him. She wanted to struggle, to curse him like the women in the tavern stories would have, but exhaustion numbed her will. They passed through the forest, the torch casting long, trembling shadows. A cabin appeared ahead, half buried in snow, smoke rising from its chimney. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. Warmth struck her like a wave. Firelight flickered across rough-hewn walls, dried herbs hanging from rafters. He set her down near the hearth, careful as if placing glass. Then he stepped back, letting her see the space. Simple, clean, quiet. "I'll bring tea," he said, disappearing into a small side room. Martha sat still, her hands trembling. Her leg throbbed, but beneath the pain was something stranger. A sense of safety she didn't trust. The cabin smelled of cedar and ashes. A single blanket lay folded on a chair. When he returned, he held a wooden cup, steam curling from it. He handed it to her, their fingers brushing. "Drink," he said. "For warmth." She lifted it, sipped. Bitter herbs, wild and unfamiliar. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees. Inside, only the crackle of fire. He sat across from her, silent, watching the flames. She studied his face, strong, calm, younger than she'd guessed. The kind of man who'd known both violence and restraint. At last she found her voice. "Why help me?" He looked at her without flinching. "Because you were alone." The simplicity of it undid her. No sermon, no pity, just truth. She turned toward the fire, blinking hard. He stood, adjusting the logs. "Rest now," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, storm worse." As he moved toward the door, she whispered, "What's your name?" He paused. The torchlight caught his profile, sharp and solemn. "Talon," he said. "Talon Red Elk." Then he stepped outside, leaving her by the fire, the snow whispering against the windows like a secret the mountains meant to keep. And somewhere in that wind, though she couldn't be sure, she thought she heard him say her name. When Martha woke, the fire had burned to a soft amber glow, and snow light shimmered through the frosted window panes. Her first thought was that she must have dreamt the night before, the tall Apache, the storm, the cabin. But the blanket across her lap was real, woven from animal hide, heavy with the scent of smoke and pine. Her leg throbbed when she tried to move. Pain anchored her to the truth. The cabin was quiet except for the slow creak of timbers in the wind. A kettle hissed faintly above the embers. On a small table beside her sat a bowl of broth, steam curling in the cold air. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but her pride held her still. Outside, she heard the crunch of footsteps, the scrape of wood against ice. Then the door opened, and Talon Red Elk stepped in. He filled the doorway like a statue carved from dusk, tall, broad-shouldered, bareheaded despite the snow dusting his dark hair. In his hands he carried a stack of split logs. When he saw her awake, he set them down gently, and spoke in that quiet tone she was coming to recognize. "Good. You live." Martha straightened, clutching the blanket closer. "I'm no dead yet," she said, voice rasped by sleep. "Though I reckon I ought to thank you for that." He nodded once, moving to stoke the fire. Sparks climbed up the chimney, scattering orange light across his face. "Storm still strong. You stay here until it passes." She frowned, testing her ankle again. It screamed in protest. "I've got work in town." He didn't look up. "Town will still be there." The simplicity of it silenced her. She watched him move, his every motion slow and deliberate, like a man used to surviving in silence. When he poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her, she hesitated before taking it. His fingers brushed hers, calloused and warm. She felt a strange rush in her chest, something half forgotten. "Thank you," she said quietly. He inclined his head. "Drink." They ate in near silence, save for the occasional crackle of firewood and the faint moan of wind through the gaps in the walls. Martha glanced around the cabin. Simple things made with care. A carved chair, a bough leaning near the door, dried corn hanging from the rafters. No sign of another soul. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yes." "No family?" "None that call me so anymore." The words settled heavy in the air. She didn't pry. Some griefs didn't need company. He studied her face the way a tracker reads snow, quietly, patiently. "You from the town below?" She nodded. "I cook at the tavern. Been there near 8 years now." He stirred the fire. "They treat you kind?" Martha let out a dry laugh. "Kind enough when their bellies are full." He looked at her then, eyes dark and steady. "You feed them even when they mock you?" "It's my job," she said, almost defensive. His gaze didn't waver. "Still kindness." She turned away, uncomfortable with the softness in his tone. No one had spoken to her like that in years, not as if her small goodness meant something. The last man who had seen worth in her had died coughing blood into her apron. As evening dimmed, the snow thickened against the window. Talon set about fixing a leak in the roof while she watched, wrapped in the fur blanket. She caught herself studying the curve of his shoulders beneath his worn deerskin shirt, the precision of his hands as he worked. He was younger, stronger, everything she wasn't. Shame flickered through her chest for even noticing. When he finished, he lit another lamp and crouched by the fire. "Tell me," he said, voice soft as the flames hum, "why you walk alone at night?" She hesitated, then sighed. "There were children. Orphans. I fed them. Sheriff said I shouldn't." "Why not?" "Because the world doesn't like what it can't profit from," she murmured. His brow furrowed. "They call that law?" "They call it order." He stared into the fire, jaw tightening. "Your order kills more than war." She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She only whispered, "You talk like a man who's seen both." He didn't answer. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't empty, it pulsed with unspoken stories. When she shifted, a spark of pain flashed in her leg. He rose, crossing the floor in 2 steps, kneeling beside her before she could protest. His large hand hovered near her ankle. "May I?" Her breath caught. "If you must." He touched gently, adjusting the bandage he'd tied earlier. His touch was sure but reverent, the way a sculptor might handle fragile stone. Martha stared at his face, lit by firelight, lashes shadowing his cheeks, expression focused yet tender. "It will heal," he said. "But you should rest. The cold outside would break you now." She smiled faintly, self-mocking. "I've been broken before." He looked up, eyes glinting. "Not all breaks are death. Some are doors." The words lingered in her chest, warm and dangerous. She turned her face away. "You speak like a preacher." "No," he said simply. "Preachers talk of heaven. I talk of what is left." She wanted to ask what he meant, but the weight of his sadness made her afraid to. Instead she reached for her cup, needing something to do with her hands. The silence filled again, gentle, heavy, alive. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, time slowed to the rhythm of their breathing. Later, when the fire sank low, he unrolled a blanket near the door. She frowned. "You're not sleepin' out there." He didn't answer. "Talon," she said, surprising herself by using his name. "This your home. I'll manage the floor." He shook his head. "You are hurt. You take the bed." "And you?" "I've slept colder nights." There was no arguing with that. Still, she watched him lie down near the fire, one arm folded under his head, the other resting across his chest. His eyes closed, but she could tell he wasn't asleep. His breathing too even, his body too still. In the quiet, she studied him. The sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple, the rise and fall of his chest. She wondered what ghosts haunted him, what loss had carved that patience into his bones. The wind softened. A single log cracked in the fire, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. Martha felt her heart shift, something small and long forgotten stirring awake. A flicker of trust, or maybe just belonging. She whispered into the dim, "Thank you, Talon." He didn't open his eyes, but his lips curved faintly. "For what?" "For finding me." His answer came like a low hum from deep within the dark. "I wasn't looking." The words puzzled her, but there was no unkindness in them. She turned toward the window, watching the snow drift past the glass in slow motion, the moon veiled behind clouds. Sleep pulled at her eyes, heavy and soft. Just before she drifted off, she thought she heard him move, the rustle of fur, the faint whisper of breath close to her ear. "Martha," he murmured, barely a sound, more like a thought loosed into the night. Her name and his voice felt like something sacred and dangerous all at once. And though she couldn't see him in the dark, she smiled faintly, because for the first time in years, the fire inside her refused to die. By the third morning, the storm had gentled to a fine whisper of snow, the kind that fell without sound, but brightened everything it touched. Martha stood by the cabin door, her shawl drawn tight, watching light crawl across the mountains. Her ankle was wrapped, still sore but holding her weight. Behind her, Talon poured water into a basin, his movements quiet as always. For 2 days he had spoken little, yet the silence between them had grown comfortable, like two people sharing the same prayer without words. She had come to know the rhythm of his days, the way he rose before dawn, the way he fed the fire before stepping out to cut wood, how his eyes softened when he glanced toward her, as if checking that she hadn't disappeared. Still, a restlessness brewed in her chest. The town lay only a few miles below. The tavern, the orphans, her meager life, they waited. Or perhaps they didn't. But she could not bear to wonder. "I should go," she said at last. Her voice trembled, and she hated that it did. "They'll think I'm gone for good." Talon set down the basin. Steam rose between them. "The storm is not done. Snow hides danger. I've lived through worse." He studied her a long moment, then nodded once, slow and reluctant. "Then I walk with you." The path down was slick with ice, and the world lay buried beneath white. Ravens circled above, their wings dark against the pale sky. They moved in silence, her breath quick and uneven, his steady and deep. Once, when her foot slipped, his hand shot out and caught her arm. She froze at his touch, aware of the warmth of his palm even through her sleeve. At the edge of town, she hesitated. Smoke rose from chimneys. and the sound of a hammer echoed faintly from the blacksmith's yard. She could smell bread baking somewhere. Yet the peace of the mountains seemed to vanish the moment the first rooftops appeared. The air felt smaller here, crowded with judgment. "You go home," she whispered. "They won't take kindly to seeing you." His gaze held hers. "And they would take kindly to you?" Her answer was a quiet sigh. "I've lived long enough not to expect kindness." He inclined his head slightly. "Still, I will not hide." They walked down the main street together. Every step drew eyes. A woman with a basket stopped mid-stride. Two ranch hands leaned on a fence, whispering. Someone muttered, "Savage," and another spat near the snow. Martha felt the weight of every stare like stones against her back. Outside the tavern, Sheriff Amos Clay emerged, coat flapping in the wind. His expression twisted between relief and reproach. "Well, I'll be damned. We thought the storm took you." His gaze slid to Talon. "Or worse." "Took me, yes," Martha said evenly. "He brought me back." Amos's jaw tightened. "You could have sent word. Folks don't take kindly to—" He glanced at Talon again, then lowered his voice. "To appearances that cause talk." "Let them talk," she said. Behind her, Talon stood motionless, his face unreadable, though his shoulders had gone rigid. The sheriff turned toward him. "You best be on your way. This here's a peaceful town." "I see no peace," Talon said quietly. The sheriff's hand drifted to his holster. Martha stepped between them before he could speak. "Stop this foolishness. He saved my life. That's the truth of it." Her words hung in the cold air. People had gathered now, faces she'd known for years, twisted in curiosity and scorn. Widow Ruthie Bell pushed through the crowd, her fur collar high around her neck. "Martha Wynne," she said, her voice smooth as glass and just as cold. "We were worried sick, dear. Imagine our surprise, seeing you walk in with, well." Her eyes flicked toward Talon. "I suppose grief makes people do strange things." Martha felt her cheeks burn. "Grief didn't bring me down that mountain," she said. "He did." A few men laughed under their breath. Someone called out, "Guess she found herself a new preacher." The laughter spread like wildfire. She wanted to shrink, to disappear. But then she caught sight of the orphan boy she'd fed, standing in the crowd, eyes wide with fear. He clutched his sister's hand. That was enough to steady her. "Laugh if you must," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "But I'll tell you this, he showed me more decency in 3 days than this town's shown me in 10 years. The words cut through the noise. The sheriff's expression softened with something like shame, though he hid it quickly. "Martha, folks just don't understand." "Then maybe it's time they try." The silence that followed was brittle. Even the wind seemed to pause. Talon shifted beside her, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. "Come," she whispered, her throat tight. "Let's go." They walked past the tavern, through the parting crowd. No one stopped them, but their stares followed like ghosts. Children watched from doorways. Mothers drew curtains closed. The town that had once been her whole world suddenly felt smaller than ever. By the time they reached the road leading out, the sun had slipped low, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold. Martha's body shook with cold and anger. Talon stopped beside her. "You defend me," he said quietly. "I defended the truth." He looked at her for a long moment. "Truth is rare." She smiled faintly, bitterly. "So's kindness." He touched the edge of her shawl, brushing away a snowflake caught there. "You are not weak, Martha Wynne." "I ain't strong either." He shook his head. "Strength is not loud." They stood there, side by side, breath mingling in the cold. Then she turned toward him, words trembling in her chest. "You should leave before they do something foolish. These people, they don't forgive what they fear." "I do not fear them," he said. "But I do." He took a slow step closer. "Then I will stand where fear ends." Something in his voice, steady, low, unyielding, broke through the wall inside her. For years she'd carried shame like a coat that couldn't come off. Now, standing beside this man the world called untamed, She felt seen, not as a burden, not as a servant, but as a woman still capable of warmth. When they reached the ridge above town, she paused and looked back. Smoke curled from chimneys, fading into dusk. The world seemed quieter up here, honest somehow. "I've lived my life feeding others," she said softly. "Never thought someone might feed my spirit back." He glanced at her, a shadow of a smile flickering. "The fire you keep warms more than yourself." For a while they said nothing. The wind carried the scent of pine and faraway hearths. She realized then that the shame she'd felt for needing help had begun to melt, slowly, like snow in spring. They reached the cabin just as night fell. Inside, the fire was low. She knelt to feed it, her fingers trembling not from cold but from something deeper. Talon stood behind her, his silhouette framed in the doorway. "You could go back tomorrow," he said quietly. "Maybe," she whispered. "But tonight, I'd rather stay where I'm not ashamed to breathe." He said nothing, yet his stillness spoke. The room filled with the soft sound of burning wood. Then, faint and distant, came the echo of hoofbeats from the valley. Slow at first, then growing louder, deliberate. Talon's head turned sharply toward the sound, every muscle taut. Martha looked up, fear curling in her gut. "They're coming," he said, voice low as thunder. And before she could ask who, the firelight flickered across his eyes, dark, calm, and ready for whatever shadow dared climb that mountain. The sound of hoofbeats rose through the valley like a distant storm, muffled by snow, but certain in its rhythm. Martha froze by the hearth, her fingers hovering above the firewood. Talon had already stepped outside, the door swinging open, letting the wind rush in. The cold bit her skin, but she followed him anyway, pulling her shawl tight as they stood beneath a bruised sky. Lanterns flickered down the hill. 3, maybe 4 riders climbing slowly toward the cabin. "They'll come to make trouble," she whispered. "They come for noise," Talon said, his breath clouding the air. "We answer with quiet." The snow thickened again, blurring the world into shades of gray. The riders reached the clearing, Sheriff Amos at the front, 2 ranch hands behind, and Ruthie Bell wrapped in fur, her face half hidden by her hood. They dismounted with the stiffness of people who feared what they'd find. "Martha!" the sheriff called, his tone heavy with something between duty and regret. "We just want to talk." She stepped forward before Talon could. "Then talk," she said, voice steady though her heart trembled. Amos looked at her, then at Talon. "Folks are stirred up. You bringin' him down to town, that wasn't wise. They say you been taken in." "Took me in, yes," Martha replied. "From a storm that would have killed me." Ruthie snorted softly. "We all need saving sometimes, dear. But a woman your age should know the difference between charity and shame." Martha's jaw clenched. "You speak of shame like it's something you've never worn." Ruthie's eyes flashed, but she stayed silent. Amos took a step closer, his boots crunching in the snow. "It's not safe for him here, Martha. Not with tempers the way they are. Men are talking about settin' things right by force." Talon didn't move. He stood like a stone carved from the mountain, his face unreadable. "If they come," he said softly, "I will not run." The sheriff exhaled, weary. "Then you'll make me choose between law and peace, and I got too little of either left." Martha's hands balled into fists inside her shawl. "You call this peace, when kindness gets punished and cruelty sits by the fire?" A wind swept between them, scattering flakes into their faces. The silence afterward was deep enough to hear the snow settling on the trees. Amos's expression faltered. "You always were stubborn, Martha Wynne," he murmured. "But don't make me bury you for it." Something in her chest cracked. "You think a woman like me hasn't been buried before?" The words hung there, raw and trembling. Then Talon stepped beside her, the movement protective but calm. His voice was low, deliberate. "She belongs nowhere you can take her. Not to your church, not to your pity." Ruthie gasped. "You speak of her like she's yours." He turned his head toward Martha, eyes softened by something fierce and tender. "She is," he said quietly, "and I am hers. The snow saw it before any of you did." The men shifted uneasily, hands brushing the butts of their guns. Amos raised a hand, warning them off. "No one's dyin' tonight. But, Talon, if you stay, I can't protect you." "I don't ask for protection," he replied. The sheriff hesitated, then nodded, as though weary of fighting a tide too strong to hold back. "Then God help you both." He mounted his horse and turned toward the trail. The others followed, though Ruthie lingered a moment, her gaze sharp and glittering. "You think this ends with mercy?" she said softly. "It never does." Then she was gone, swallowed by the storm. Talon closed the door once the hoofbeats faded. The cabin felt smaller, the air charged with what had been said. Martha leaned against the wall, shaking. Not from cold, but from the weight of what had just happened. "They'll come again," she said. "Yes," he answered. "But not tonight." She met his eyes. "And when they do?" He stirred the fire with a slow hand. "Then I'll stand in front of you until the wind takes me." Her throat tightened. "Why?" He turned, expression unreadable but voice full of quiet truth. "Because you looked at me and did not see an enemy." Something broke inside her. Years of silence, years of endurance mistaken for peace. She moved closer, her hand trembling as it touched his arm. "You shouldn't have to pay for my belonging." He took her hand, his palm rough, grounding. "We pay for warmth with scars. I have many." They stood close enough that she could feel the rhythm of his breath. Outside, the wind had softened to a sigh. The firelight caught on his skin, painting him in copper and gold. She wanted to say something, about fear, about being seen, but words felt too small. Instead, she reached for the kettle, poured him a cup of tea, and handed it over. He accepted it as though it were an oath. "You cook even now," he said, almost smiling. "It's the one thing I've ever been sure I could do right," she whispered. He looked at her a long moment, then said, "Then keep cooking. Keep feeding the cold." They shared the tea in silence, two breaths moving in rhythm while the snow whispered against the windows. Somewhere far below, faintly, came the sound of shouting, men's voices carried by the wind. Martha's heart lurched. Talon heard it too. He set the cup down, standing slowly. "They come sooner than I thought." She rose, limping to the window. Lanterns flickered again in the distance. "They'll burn this place," she said. Talon's tone was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Then we let the fire tell the truth." The first gunshot cracked through the night. She flinched, ducking instinctively. Talon moved to the door, opening it just enough to see. Shadows moved at the tree line. He stepped out, unarmed but unafraid. Martha grabbed his arm. "Don't!" He looked back, and something in his eyes silenced her. The kind of peace that belongs to men who've already made their choice. "If they see only a beast," he said, "let them learn what kind of heart the beast carries." The wind roared, drowning her words as he walked into the snow. Lantern light danced across him like fire across ice. The men shouted, warning him back. He kept walking. Then another sound, a cry, small and sharp. From behind the riders, two children stumbled into view. The orphans. The girl tripped, and one of the men cursed, yanking her by the arm. Martha's blood went cold. Talon's voice carried through the storm, deep and resonant. "Let them go." The man raised his gun. Before Martha could breathe, Talon moved. Swift, silent, a blur in the snow. The gun fired, echoing off the mountains. When the smoke cleared, the man was on the ground, the weapon cast aside. The children ran, and Talon caught them, shielding them with his body as another shot rang out. Martha burst from the cabin, pain forgotten. She threw herself over the children as the wind howled, and the snow turned red where it met the firelight. The remaining riders fled, their courage scattered into the storm. Silence fell again, deep and endless. Talon knelt in the snow, blood on his shoulder, breath heavy. The children clung to Martha's skirts. She reached for him, hands trembling. "You're hurt." He smiled faintly, teeth bright in the dark. "Not enough to stop breathing." She pressed her forehead to his, tears hot against the cold. "You're mine now," he whispered, voice barely a breath. "Not to keep, but to honor. Outside, the wind quieted as dawn crept over the horizon, turning the snow to gold. And from that day on, when people spoke of the fire that burned beneath the snow, they said it began with an old woman's kindness, and the man who saw it as sacred.